Have you ever known anyone who had a very dramatic kind of medical problem? Maybe they woke up one morning and they couldn't walk, or for some other reason their life was very seriously impeded by some kind of physical problem. Well, I'm familiar with a family member, a young child actually, who had been walking just fine and then stopped walking. It turned out that he was very upset because his parents were having a lot of strife. And so for a couple of weeks, he couldn't walk at all. And then suddenly, all of his medical problems disappeared. It seemed clear that there was a psychological cause for his situation. And so in this chapter, in this topic, we're going to be looking at somatic symptom disorders and conversion, and then of course what they are not. Sometimes people are faking certain medical problems, and they're doing it with knowledge that indeed it is not a medical problem. So let's dive in. Let's look at a case. And so I'd like to have you think about a case like this. So here's Selma. And she had a very tense conversation with her boss recently because she was late to work. She tried to explain it was due to the bus and it wasn't always reliable, but he was not listening. He shook his head, and then he threatened her with the loss of the job if it ever happened again. Of course, the next morning, she woke up and she couldn't even lift her head off the pillow. Both of her arms felt completely dead, paralyzed. So the family eventually had a doctor come in to examine Selma, and no problem, no physical damage could account for why she couldn't move her arms and her head. But 2 weeks later, her boss found another job and her paralysis suddenly disappeared completely, never to recur again. So psychologists call that kind of phenomena a conversion disorder, and it actually dates back to Sigmund Freud. So let's get clear on what it involves. First of all, the individual who has these dramatic medical, physical symptoms does not in any way think that they are a fake. They are not trying to fake them. They don't believe they are false. The individual truly believes they have a serious medical problem. And they show up physically, but there's a psychological base. They also recover pretty quickly and spontaneously. So, for instance, with Selma, a couple of weeks after her paralysis began, she was moving just fine and able to negotiate her arms, her head, etc. in a normal way. So conversion disorder is very sudden and dramatic. It's an actual loss of function, and it only lasts for a brief period of time because it is purely psychological. So there are different patterns that conversion might take on. Could be loss of motor movements, maybe ability to move your hands, your arms, your legs. Could be blindness, a visual issue. And sometimes we also find that the people who suffer from these kinds of dramatic symptoms are those that have the fewest resources, maybe the poorest among us, or those who have the least education. Also, it's true that women have twice the number of these pretty rare conversion problems compared to men. And it tends to show itself pretty early, usually childhood or the early years of adolescence and maybe even early adulthood. So why is conversion not a medical issue? Well, first of all, they don't develop or persist in a way that people who know the body expect that they would. So doctors get very suspicious because there isn't damage to certain nerves or body parts. And so there's a story that I'm familiar with of a man who had a paralyzed hand, but there was absolutely no damage to either the radial or the ulnar nerves that control the hand. And furthermore, this man could sometimes move his hand when something threatened him, like maybe a spider crawled on his face or a bee was near, and suddenly the hand was moving and knocking the spider or the bee away. So when that's the case, the doctors are rightly suspicious of any kind of really physical problem. And indeed, they start to look quickly at psychological issues.